Good morning, evening, afternoon, middle of the night. We are officially 10 days away from the NFL draft as we're recording this. We have done our QB and tight end rookie rankings. Make sure you go check those out if you have not. And today, I am always joined by the ever-present, ever-energetic, full of hot takes, and better dynasty teams, Ben Weiner. Ben, how we doing?
I am doing great because I have been very excited to talk about wide receivers because honestly, and I know that everyone tuning in last week, like how you said, I bring the noise, I bring the energy. And these quarterbacks and tight ends, they don't get me super excited, unfortunately. But when I'm looking at 6 wide receivers who all have unbelievable upside and 10 guys I want to take in the first 2 rounds of drafts and sleepers that I think I can identify the next Terry McLaurin in the round 3 of your rookie draft or the next Deontay Johnson. That's when I'm jazzed up because as much as I love Matt Corral, as much as we like Isaiah Likely, those guys won't win you your entire fantasy league, but getting these things right that we're going to discuss today absolutely will. So I am very excited to bring the noise. And before we really get into things, just a friendly reminder, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review. Please follow us at Ben the Pylon Don, at AJ the Pylon Don, at Pylon Dons all on Twitter, and at the Pylon Dons on Instagram. Shout out to our sponsor, First Gaming, and back to your regularly scheduled rambling. AJ, when is the last time that you and I have been in lockstep 5 players down a ranking at a position in anything? This is crazy.
Never.
This is madness.
Never
we
really.
agree. Don't worry. We're going to disagree about a lot of things if you're listening. There's going to be disagreements even to our process to how we got to these 5 guys. But AJ, if you don't mind, I just read them off just so the people know. AJ and I share our top 5 rookie rankings. We have Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 1, Drake London as the wide receiver 2, Treylon Burks as the wide receiver 3, Jameson Williams as the wide receiver 4, and Chris Olave as the wide receiver 5. However, how we feel about all of these guys is very, very different. So just because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doesn't mean we're in lockstep, and there will certainly be some disagreements to hash out.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely, even though we've got these guys ranked the same way, we definitely have varying levels of comfortability on where we're going to be drafting these guys on our big boards, how landing spot dependent some of these guys are. So really, I'm ready to just dive right in. I mean, usually we'll kind of shoot the breeze, but I really want to get into these receivers right away. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly talk about Garrett Wilson.
Please.
As my Twitter bio says, number 1 Garrett Wilson truther.
You've been on this. I will give you credit. You've been on this. We were making trades back in January in the fantasy vetoers, and this was back when Treylon Burks was pretty consensusly above Garrett Wilson, and then we all opened our eyes and, realized what was happening in front of us. But you were like, oh, yeah, I'll trade back to the 104, like Garrett Wilson, I don't need Burks. I can take Wilson later. But then what happened to me was I realized that you were going to get to choose Garrett Wilson, and I was going to be stuck with Treylon Burks. So I was very upset after that deal.
Yeah, this is a guy that I've been on since he was a true freshman, and really, for the modern NFL game, he checks off all the boxes. You could argue, even though this term is very subjective, that he is the safest of this top tier of wideouts, and this takes into projection draft capital, rookie draft ADP as well, which has risen. But we're talking about a guy who was an early declare, an early career breakout at Ohio State. He continuously improved throughout college. He did so next to other first-round talents at the position. We're talking Chris Olave, who is projected to go into the first round, who we'll talk about later, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is projected to be the wide receiver 1 in next year's draft class. So Wilson is going to be coming into the NFL. He just ranked 7th in the class in yards per route run, and he accounted for a little over 20% of Ohio State's receptions and 23% of their receiving yards, both higher rates than Chris Olave, which is of note, even though Olave did beat him out in touchdowns. Wilson kind of comes in with more pro-ready numbers as well as pro-ready style of play. So obviously he doesn't have the frame of a true alpha that maybe Treylon Burks or Drake London is going to be providing. But the league is really adopting these leaner receivers. We saw Jalen Waddle go 6th overall, a pick that surprised a lot of people. And clearly,
myself
I think
included for that matter.
Miami would do that all over again. I was really big on Waddle. I think Wilson is a more polished receiver than Jalen Waddle. He's not the level of deep threat and not necessarily the same yak guy. But what Wilson is able to do, not only in the slot but outside, I just really don't see any red flags. I mean, he may not have the highest finish of any receiver in this class, but if we're talking like who is going to have that 5-year stretch of set it and forget it, this would be my first guy. And when you're talking dynasty, I really think that that is so important. So I'm very comfortable putting 21-year-old Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver 1.
I feel very similarly. I actually got the chance to see Garrett Wilson live against Rutgers, and he only put up 371 and a touchdown. I say only. He averaged like 23 yards a reception and scored a touchdown. He was unbelievable in an absolute blowout. What I love about Garrett Wilson is that he's always been good. Like we say, he broke out early as a freshman, but he was one of the best high school football players in Texas, which is the best high school football in the country. And then he went and dominated at Ohio State. And then he was better than Chris Olave at Ohio State and better than Jameson Williams. He's always been that dude and will continue to be that dude. He is, I don't want to say one of the chosen ones, but when you talk about guys who have been the best player on the field pretty much every day of their entire life since Pop Warner football, you're talking about Garrett Wilson. I'm happy you brought up Jalen Waddle, because I think I missed on Waddle last offseason. I didn't like Jalen Waddle as much as I should have, and I missed some hints there. But I think that like right off the bat, like Garrett Wilson to me seems to be a pretty clear-cut 102 in single quarterback formats. And additionally, I think he could be a Jalen Waddle type player even as a rookie. I really think that like he's like, we hate to say it, but Chase is above Waddle. I'm not willing to put Wilson above Waddle, but I'm willing to put him in the same group as Jalen Waddle. I am very, very excited about this guy.
Yeah, and I think he can have a similar rookie season. I mean, Waddle, we talk about him as a deep threat. We talk about him as a yards after catch guy. He had a pretty low ADOT, and obviously a lot of that comes from playing with Tua. But Garrett Wilson is somebody that could really thrive if he goes to the right offense and is set up to succeed in terms of pure volume. So for fantasy purposes, I think he can really kind of replicate what Jalen Waddle did and have an 1,000-yard season as a rookie. Whereas the rest of these guys, I'm not 100% sure that they'll go anywhere and be able to do that.
So funny. So I actually somewhat disagree with that take. Like we said, if you're listening, like we're going to have disagreements out as to how we feel about these guys, just not the order we have them. And I think that Drake London, provided he's in the right landing spot, which we'll talk about briefly, is ready to make an instant impact. And if you don't, I'd like to get into why.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Drake London last year went for 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns in 8 games. He was the runaway favorite for the Bilenkoff Award for the best wide receiver in college football before he broke his ankle. The only knocks on Drake London are that he played in the Pac-12. Fine, not great, but he was unbelievable in the Pac-12. And that he didn't run the 40. And newsflash, I don't care that Drake London didn't run the 40. We were drafting guys last year. There was no NFL combine. Like Jamar Chase didn't go to a combine. So I really don't care that we didn't see Drake London run the 40. We've watched his tape. We've seen how dominant he was. We know he's the goods. And additionally, NFL teams seem to have Drake London as our wide receiver 1 in the class. NFL teams have Wilson and London as a coin flip type guy. Both should be off the board by pick 15, but people have London as high as pick 8 to Atlanta. And additionally, no one seems to care in terms of his draft capital that he hasn't ran. No one seems to care about the injury. So all I'm seeing is a 6'4" behemoth with hands who can run, is an absolute menace on the field, can play every single position on the field, and was going to be the best wide receiver in college football last year as a junior. These first 4, and honestly 5, even Chris Olave, I'll give him like some courtesy for playing next to Garrett Wilson. All 5 of these guys, like they're all wonderful. They are all great receivers coming out of college. They all have pros and cons except Wilson, who's pretty just straightforward. But London's next for me too, because I think he has the next best case. He has least flaws among these other guys. So for me, Drake London, I think, can come onto the field and be an instant impact type guy for your fantasy lineup.
So for me, Drake London is also at 2. but I think I've got him a little closer to 3 than 1. And I kind of just want to go into a few reasons. 24% of his targets were on screen passes last year. And he isn't as dynamic as Treylon Burks was, who also received quite a few screen passes. And I don't know how much we're actually going to see that type of short, quick hitter go to a receiver of his build in the NFL. I don't see him catching that many passes at the line of scrimmage just because I don't think that's the way teams are going to scheme him. I mean, we're talking about a guy that
totally agree with you, by the way. I agree with you. I think that's a really reasonable and good observation. I have no problem with that take.
We're talking about a guy that had 42% of his routes command a target and averaged 11 receptions. This guy could be in a phone booth, as Chad Ochocinco would say, with 2 defenders, and they would still give him the ball because they would be like, all right, he's open. And the way that works.
Well, a phone booth with no roof, because he'll just reach up. If you're watching with us on YouTube, he could be in the phone booth because people can't reach him. He's like, what's up?
But the thing is he converted almost 70% of his contested targets, which is like far and away the highest rate in this class. And that's something that you can't really teach. So you can maybe teach Drake London to run a better slant or to run a better hitch, a route that he ran great, by the way. You can sort of teach him to become more versatile. And I think if his draft capital that he's currently being projected is what happens, where he's being drafted inside the top 15, even potentially inside the top 10, they'll find a way to use him. And I could potentially be eating my words on how versatile he gets used at the NFL level. But it does, like, the minor hesitation, and Connor Coggins is going to be hooting and hollering because he's been saying this, and I'm starting to hear him out. London didn't really have a ton of high-end efficiency on routes that we typically see at the next level, and he really does rely on the contested catch, but he's so talented, and he broke out basically a month after he turned 18 years old, that I'm pretty comfortable thinking he'll be able to do that at the next level, especially with the draft capital he's going to get.
Yeah, so I'm sick of Connor Coggins and his nonsense Drake London takes. I think the fact that he owns T. Higgins and runs his mouth about Drake London is pretty much like drinking ketchup and saying you don't eat marinara sauce. So I really don't have time for Connor Coggins and his nonsense takes. But anyhow, I wanted to add in one more thing with London that I really like about him. Is that London's age 18 breakout came with Michael Pittman and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the offense. So we talk about Garrett Wilson playing with like Chris Olave, Jackson Smith-Njigba, even Jameson Williams. I'm like, oh, he was better than all those guys? Well, that's great. But Drake London is better than Michael Pittman, who's a pretty consensus top 24 dynasty receiver, and tons of people have him higher. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, who, while I'm not super a fan of, is certainly an NFL receiver at this point. So I just feel like, for me, I'm looking at a guy, if anyone can take targets away from Michael Pittman at 18 years old, I want him on my fantasy team. That's how I feel about it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, I can't really argue with anything you said, and I am still going to be drafting Drake London inside the top 5 of every rookie draft. So I'm ready to talk about Treylon Burks. Here's where it goes. All right.
It's funny because we said it at the same time, but we said different things, meaning we weren't in sync, just like how we're not really in sync on Treylon Burks.
I would like to go first, if you don't mind.
Please do.
So I think Treylon Burks provides the most upside of any receiver in this draft class. And when you are taking receivers that you think at some point in their career can finish inside the top 24 multiple times, which with these top 3 receivers, I'm pretty comfortable saying that about all of them. I'm pretty comfortable if he goes to the right spot, swinging for the fences and taking him over Drake London. I view this as a 2A, 2B, with Burks being the 2B, just because he was first in yards per route run. He caught over 30% of his team's receptions. He's 6'2", 225, ran a 4.55, 6th best size-adjusted speed score in the class. A lot of the comps we're getting are Demaryius Thomas. We're getting Des Bryant. I don't necessarily agree with that. they got Treylon Burks the football in his hands, not in the way that Des Bryant and Demaryius Thomas did. We watched Treylon Burks line up in the backfield. We watched Treylon Burks cast more screen passes than Drake London. Almost 60% of his yardage came after the catch. This guy is a specimen, and I think people are really starting to forget that because he ran 67.7% of his routes in the slot. This isn't like your true X, stick him on the outside, throw him some fades receiver. This is an athlete. Like he gives me major Deebo Samuel vibes in terms of what he can be at the next level, and it might not be next year. And I'd be pretty shocked if he was the top scoring receiver in his class as a rookie. But I really do think he can finish his career as the best receiver in this class. It just might take some time, and it just might take the perfect landing spot to do it.
So I think that's great analysis, and I don't have any major issues with what you said. I don't there's nothing I thought we were honestly going to disagree more. I thought we were ready to jump through the screen and be like, how could you even have Treylon Burks that close to Drake London? I even said a minute ago, all of these receivers have really high ceilings, and they can all do very unique things, and they're all very good in their right. If you need a wide receiver, this is a great year to have a top 5 pick. All 5 of these guys should be long-term NFL guys, but I'm going to get into my take on Burks for a bit. I think Burks was penalized for his combine for not doing what Breece Hall did. Like we said before, Treylon Burks showed up to the combine. Breece Hall showed out at the combine. But at the same time, I don't feel like Treylon Burks should be penalized for this. I feel like the combine brought us back to where we should have had Treylon Burks in the first place. And we were just too high on him before. We got too excited. Burks, like you said, has all the upside of Wilson and London, but he just has 1 or 2 extra question marks. And I'm coming to this draft looking for answers. And I think Garrett Wilson or Drake London could be an answer, whereas Treylon Burks could send me down a rabbit hole of more questions. Whenever I start to get a bit too low on Burks, which happens at times because there are these concerns, I rewatch his tape and remind myself of how freaky this guy can be. Because he's here, the speed on tape, the size is unbelievable. But I have a couple concerns with Burks. The first concern with me for Burks is that while he is an unbelievable athlete, don't get me wrong, I don't think that his athleticism at the next level, I think that he can be caught up to. In the sense that he will be a more athletic NFL player than most NFL players, but there will similarly be better defenders. And I don't know if Treylon Burks will be able to dominate defenses just based on being bigger and faster like he did in college, the same way at the NFL level. I'm sure he'll be able to sometimes, and I'm sure he'll continue to develop and be coached up and improve route running and diversify the route tree. But the other thing for me is, well, I guess that's also twofold too. Excuse my rambling. People say he's an A.J. Brown clone, which sounds great in theory, but a lot of these sides speed guys haven't worked out before. There's a lot of bad N'Keal Harry comps, which honestly doesn't scare me that much. What scares me more is comps to a guy with Sami Watkins, who actually has pretty similar measurables and even higher draft capital than people thought that Treylon Burke should get. And it's just proof that, as fast and strong as you are, and even if you have hands, sometimes it doesn't all come together for a player. And this leads me to my last concern, whereas while we all have Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Treylon Burke similarly, the NFL doesn't. The NFL, based on what's coming out of reports and 30 visits and pretty much whatever McShay is cooking up and what people are leaking, or Daniel Jeremiah, it appears to be that Wilson and London are the surefire top 2 receivers in the draft, with maybe a J-Mo or a Chris Olave sneaking in. Well, there's no talk of Treylon Burks being in there. Which, while I understand the ability, the fact the NFL has those evaluations on him at this point in time, this can change with draft capital, but it concerns me. So for me, I now have Treylon Burks as my clear-cut wide receiver 3. Sky is the limit, but unfortunately for me, hell is the floor. That's where I'm at on him. I think he can be absolutely great, but those are just more concerns than I listed for Drake London. It's not that his ceiling is any worse. It's that there's more things I want to know about than Drake London.
Yeah, I get the concerns. People really did think he was going to measure as a superhuman, and he measured as a pretty damn athletic NFL prospect. So that, unfortunately, those expectations really set a few people, soured a few people off of Treylon Burks. But Burks ranked top 4. First of all, shout out Dwayne McFarland from Pro Football Focus. He did a really great case study on the staple routes that are run in the NFL and how each of these college prospects graded on these routes. Treylon Burke's ranked within the top 4 on go routes, ins, and slants.
These are three most important. Yeah.
They're arguably the 3 most important routes used in the NFL. And I think that can translate to some immediate upside. Again, I think it's going to take GMs and coaches and franchises a little bit of time to figure out how to use him. I mean, we didn't see Samuel use this way his first or second year. And he looked great at the second half of his rookie year, but it took him time. I see a real world where Treylon Burks requires that bit of time. And I could see a real buy low window into his rookie year. But at the end of the day, I really do think he has the potential to be a top 3 fantasy football receiver. But like you said, the floor can be very low and you may have to be very, very patient. So if you're looking for a quicker turnaround or you're looking for a tried and true cornerstone, you may be better off going Drake London or Garrett Wilson, which is kind of why I have him at 3 right now.
Yeah, so exactly. And also I wanted to speak on something really quick with my rankings. And I haven't spoke with you about this, but I'm setting a new rule for myself this year. Because you remember how in years past people overreact to draft capital and landing spots and all the what have yous. I made a rule for myself this year at my rankings. You can be 1 spot for draft capital, 1 spot up or down for landing spot. Garrett Wilson will not fall lower than my wide receiver 3, even if he is the second pick of the Philadelphia Eagles at pick 18 or what have you. Doesn't matter. It's 1 spot for draft capital, 1 spot for landing spot. That's just my process because I don't want to have overreactions. And where that goes into, though, is that there's a world, hypothetically, where Treylon Burks could move up these rankings. Absolutely. If he is drafted to the Kansas City Chiefs or the Los Angeles Chargers as the second wide receiver off the board, that will have my attention. So these aren't set in stone, but I need more answers before I can really commit to Treylon Burks.
That's fair. I can't fault you for that one bit.
It's risk averse. Call me soft. It's risk averse.
No, it's a great way to operate, especially when you're picking in the top half of a rookie draft. You do need to take things like that into consideration. Speaking of things that are not risk averse, Jameson Williams, shall I go into it or do you want to take it away?
Please.
This Jameson Williams left Ohio State not being able to beat out Wilson or Olave. Immediately, he steps into an offense that loses Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, and he goes for over 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns. He is legit. Don't get it twisted. He's also coming off an ACL injury. He's also under 180 pounds. He also won a lot of his plays downfield, and he is the number 1 deep threat in this class. I mean, he was top 5 in percentage of targets over 20 yards downfield. No receiver had more yards and touchdowns on throws 30-plus yards in the air this year. So this guy is a deep threat. This ACL injury in the national title game, I know that NFL scouts are not starting to really lower his draft stock significantly because of it. But like we've said so many times, the injuries will find you in fantasy football, and it's kind of hard to start taking a guy that is supposed to be the turnaround player, a cornerstone, a building block that is coming in with an injury history. It kind of scares me, and I think I couldn't take him over any of these top 3 or Kenneth Walker, regardless of landing spot at this point. I was pretty high on Jameson Williams earlier, but I just think these 3 wide receivers in terms of versatility of routes run and total production profile throughout multiple years of their career. Obviously, Treylon Burks less so than London and Wilson. I'm pretty scared to take Jameson Williams inside the top 5 when there could potentially be better landing spots for the guy we're going to talk about next. So I want to hear what you have to say. I know I was a little bit pessimistic on Jameson Williams, but I want to hear what you have to say about him.
So here's my thing with Jameson Williams. is that I don't fault him for not being able to beat out Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave. That's I'm not concerned about that. There is no shame in not being better than Garrett Wilson because, frankly, nobody's better than Garrett Wilson. He's the best wide receiver in this class. As for Chris Olave, he was a junior there. He was the veteran player. And Chris Olave was probably better than Jameson Williams at this time. Jameson Williams had to go to Alabama. He had to get the reps, and he balled out. I'm very confident in his ability and his draft capital. Where my hesitation comes for with Jameson Williams is honestly more so the immediate impact. I don't know what the 2022 season is going to look like for Jameson Williams. I don't view him as overly landing spot dependent, but I certainly would rather see him be in a good landing spot than a bad one because I think it would give me more confidence with his long-term value. Say if Jameson Williams comes in this year, he falls to pick up 22 and the Green Bay Packers take him, and he misses the first half of the season, starts off slow in the second half, and flashes towards the stretch, even looks good in the playoffs, I'll feel a lot better about that outcome with Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback than I would with Jalen Hurts as his quarterback in Philly. So the quarterback here can earn you a lot of patience. I think that if Jameson Williams is a Charger, he even has a chance to move up these rankings, and I'm willing to be patient because I have no questions about the talent, and I'm a huge believer in early breakout age as well. And generally, you do love to see that, but look at this level of competition. I don't know what more I can ask for a guy who dominated the SEC the way he did. So that's where I'm at on Jameson Williams. What I will say, though, is there is certainly a world where Chris Olave overtakes him as the wide receiver 4. I do think Jameson Williams is vulnerable, but extremely talented.
It is important to note that he was being considered as the first receiver off the board not too long ago.
Above Garrett Wilson.
Absolutely. He was projected to be the first receiver off the board in the NFL draft by more than a few experts in the field. So there is something to say about that. He is under 21 years old. This guy cannot buy a beer, and he just put up 1,600 yards in the SEC. By no means am I saying to avoid Jameson Williams. I'm just saying you're going to have to be willing to take a back seat and watch him develop. And I think similarly to Treylon Burks, obviously for different reasons, it's why the two of them are falling a peg behind Drake London and Garrett Wilson. Because when I'm drafting Drake London or Garrett Wilson, I am expecting to drop them in the lineup and never think about it for the next 5 years.
10 years, please.
Probably that. So let's talk about number 5, because I know we do want to get into 6 through 10 a little bit as well. Chris Olave put up 840 yards, 12 touchdowns as a sophomore, and then he pretty much sustained his per-game production throughout the entirety of his career. Finished his 4-year career with 35 touchdown grabs, a school record for Ohio State. Not uncommon for Ohio State to put out elite receiving talent. See Michael Thomas. So to have the touchdown record for Ohio State is really a stamp. Him being a senior declare definitely knocks him down a peg from some of the earlier declares. Olave, underratedly, one of the best contested catch players in this class. Believe he was second behind only Drake London, so above Treylon Burks in that regard, which is something of note. Pretty much a physical copy of Garrett Wilson. They both measure in about 6 foot to 6'1", around 190 pounds. And the thing that put him back on a lot of people's radar was the under 4.4 40-yard dash he ran at the combine. However, just the lack of him not being an early declare compared to the rest of these guys is really something historically. Early declares tend to have higher upside when they hit the NFL, and so that's why I've got Olave at 5. But if we're talking just in a vacuum talent, you could really argue that he should be higher.
I agree. I think people forget with early declares. It's not, and even breakout age for that matter. It's not so much that he's 23 years old and Drake London is turning 21. So his career is 2 years behind and it's not that. The thing is that at 23 years old, Chris Olave is probably closer to his apex. He has spent more time being coached, learning things, and he's more polished, which is great, except that leaves more untapped potential in the Drake Londons and Garrett Wilsons, who are only going to get so much better. Chris Olave has a lot of room to grow, but if he has 80% to grow while London and Wilson have 100% to grow, I want that extra 20%. I want that little extra rope, that extra time. What I will say about Chris Olave is being a top 3 speed guy and a top 3 route runner in the same class is a dangerous combination. And generally, I'm not a guy who I really don't like seniors coming out. I generally prefer early declares, and I'm not bothered that Chris Olave is not an early declare. If he came out last year, he probably would have been drafted in a similar spot in rookie drafts where he's going this year. I think Olave is a really great chance to come in and contribute on day one. He's as savvy as any 23-year-old entering the league, and I think he has a chance to finish above Burks and Jameson Williams for this upcoming season, pretty regardless of landing spot, because he could be better receivers and more NFL ready than either one of those guys are today. However, it's the long-term upside, and that's what we're chasing in rookie drafts. I just got to have him behind these guys because I think that the other 4 have more upside. That's just where it is. But I think Chris Olave is a rock-solid pick. If you take Chris Olave, anywhere from the 106 to the 109, you should be feeling really good about yourself.
Yeah, if you were a playoff team in your dynasty league and you're adding Chris Olave, you should be extremely, extremely happy because I do think he can be an immediate contributor. So let's, for 6 through 10, since we're already at the 30-minute mark, why don't you read your 6 through 10 rankings and then I'll read mine, and then we can sort of hot seat each other on a couple of things.
Works for me. Jahan Dotson out of Penn State, George Pickens, Skye Moore. Oh, no, did I say Christian? Sorry, reset. Brain fart. Excuse me. Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, Christian Watson, Skye Moore, and I am making a spur of the moment because you hear my voice. I am moving Justin Ross over David Bell to my 10th spot. So my 5 are Dotson, Pickens, Watson, Moore, and Justin Ross.
All right. Well, I've got George Pickens at 6, followed by Jahan Dotson, Skye Moore, Christian Watson, and David Bell at 10. So we're pretty much flip-flopped in a few spots. Let's talk Dotson versus Pickens first, because I think these guys are relatively polar opposites.
Totally agree.
They both have moved around quite a bit. Why don't you talk about why you have Dotson over Pickens first?
Well, so everything I just said about Chris Olave, in a weird way, to a lesser extent, applies to Jahan Dotson. Dotson's smaller, but I don't really care that Dotson's a senior. His production was unbelievable. He tested great. NFL teams seem to love him. He should be a lock for the first-round pick. And I really like George Pickens. I really do. But I feel like that George Pickens is kind of similar to, in a very, very different way. So it's a very loose comparison. So I don't think I'm comparing play styles or situations. But there's more questions about him. Similar to the sense where I have like Garrett Wilson over Treylon Burks, I feel there's less questions with Jahan Dotson as opposed to George Pickens. George Pickens can absolutely be better than Jahan Dotson. This is one that can burn me, but I feel really good about what I'm getting in Jahan Dotson, and I think NFL teams agree, and I think that Dotson will come onto the field and immediately produce.
Yeah, Jahan Dotson strikes me as a guy that can immediately come on day one and start to get snaps. I mean, he put up 91 receptions for almost 1,200 yards as a senior, caught almost half of the receiving touchdowns for his team. The big thing is physical profile. Dotson is definitely not a physically dominant guy. He measured in at 5'10" and 180 pounds. And this kind of shows up in man coverage, which Dotson struggled in. He ranked outside the top 30 in yards per route run against man coverage. That was a stat that really jumped off the page for me. George Pickens, former 5-star recruit, put up a true freshman stat line of 50 receptions for 727 yards and 8 touchdowns. Capped that freshman season off at 18 years old by winning the Sugar Bowl MVP with 12 catches for 175 yards and a touchdown. This breakout age rivals that of Drake London. He lit up Cincinnati the next year in the Peach Bowl with 135 yards and a touchdown. This initial production is just like one of the biggest green flags you can ask for out of a receiving prospect. He's only played 12 games in the last 2 seasons, and this is the massive red flag that stands right next to that green flag and makes it look like Italy. The ACL injury in March really scared people off quite a bit. He was able to come back. The size is also interesting. I mean, he's 6'3", but he's coming in at under 200 pounds. This is going to be one of those things where draft capital for me is going to be the big swinger on George Pickens.
I'm happy you said that. I was thinking that. I'm happy
this guy could go 21 or 22. This guy could go 50. And both of those options are, in my mind, equally likely. So depending on where he gets drafted, not only team situation, but purely where on the NFL draft board he goes is really going to change it. But just that upside he showed when he was younger, if he's able to string together a full healthy season in the right system, I think he can really, really provide quite a bit of return on investment in the late first round.
I totally agree. And I love the idea of getting a guy who is considered to be the number 1 receiver in this class as a freshman at like the wide receiver 7 spot. That's exciting to me. Don't get me wrong. Jahan Dotson feels rock solid in a Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave-esque way to me. And that's what that comes down to. I think Pickens is a great pick afterwards. The tough thing with me for Pickens as well is, and we'll get into Justin Ross a little bit later, but I feel like that I can get some of that upside with a similar number of questions for a lower investment. But we'll keep going right now because you said you had Skye Moore and then Christian Watson, correct?
Yeah, I've been sipping the Skye Moore Kool-Aid almost as long as I've been sipping the Garrett Wilson Kool-Aid. He broke out pretty early at Western Michigan at age 19, accounting for over 20% of the team's receptions. He played second fiddle to D. Eskridge. But then in 2021, he absolutely just blew the roof off of this place. He ranks pretty much in the top 5 in every statistical category, from team receptions of 40%, touchdowns 43.5%. When we talk Skye Moore from a film perspective, though, his release at the line of scrimmage is one of the first things that jumps off the page. This guy is a slant route nightmare. Nickel corners are going to have nightmares about Skye Moore. Whoever's lining up across from him in the slot in training camp is going to lose their ankles more than a couple times. He has the highest percent of targets on slants, over 20%, and 33% of his yards came on slants. That's the type of guy that immediately comes in and gets 85 targets as a rookie. And then boom, next year it turns into 110. The only issue is we basically have next to no sample of Moore producing at the highest level. Outside of the MAC-10, he pretty much was not really there, and he didn't really have the opportunity to be there. The big red flag in his game log in this most recent season was the dud he put up against Michigan. So pretty much the best team they played that year, he really did not show out. But when you're looking for smaller school production, which is really what you're getting down to between him and Watson, I think Skye Moore just checks a few more of those boxes that I'm looking for, especially for the potential late first / dipping into the early second round, probably closer to early second.
100%. And I really like Skye Moore. I thought he looked unbelievable at the combine. Also, I didn't mention this for Dotson, but Dotson also totally took care of business at the combine.
Absolutely.
So he did everything right. And so did Skye Moore. Skye Moore I really like. And I'm hoping the listeners are starting to see a pattern with how I'm approaching this draft, because I'm looking for value. I want to get the best deal for the best outcome and still have my butt covered. And the reason I have Christian Watson over Skye Moore is I think Christian Watson is honestly an athletic freak like a Drake London or a Treylon Burks. But because he played at North Dakota State and because the production profile wasn't really there, we can get him a whole lot cheaper. I view his overall ceiling. I don't want to say comparable. That wouldn't be fair to London and Burks. All I'm saying is the things that we like about London and Burks are things that I see with Christian Watson as well and still like about him. And additionally, Christian Watson's been shooting up draft boards. He was great at the Senior Bowl. He was a freak at the Combine, and he really has an outside shot to be a first-round pick. So given all of these tools, I almost feel like that Christian Watson, much like George Pickens, could be a guy that could be going later in drafts, but end up being a second-round DK Metcalf, AJ Brown type guy. I really think the sky's the limit there. No pun with Skye Moore, and that's why I have Watson above. But I think when we're like we're talking about the wide receiver 9, and we love him. This is like, I just hope that people realize this is a good draft class. These wide receivers are great. We haven't even talked about John Metchi, Justin Ross, David Bell. Like, we can keep going. Like, these guys are deep, and they're all going to be NFL receivers, and it's unbelievable.
Yeah, if you're picking inside the top 15 multiple times, there's a pretty good chance you're walking away with more than one wide receiver, because everybody after Chris Olave, pretty much the next 7 receivers, it's going to come down to draft capital and team situation. But those guys are pretty locked in to potentially be some really good early contributors. The thing I want to talk about with Christian Watson real quick is obviously a physical specimen that blows pretty much everybody not named Drake London, Treylon Burks, or George Pickens out of the water. Christian Watson wasn't one of those guys that lined up and just ran go routes for a D2 school. This guy returned kicks. This guy played both inside the slot, outside, and people have started to fault him for his route running, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. I urge you, if you are not a fan of Christian Watson's route running, to go watch his tape, not only from the games that he played, but from his tape at the Senior Bowl. The way this guy accelerates off the snap to create separation is, again, not something you can teach. You can teach him how to clean up his footwork on an out route. You can't teach somebody that's 6'4" to jump off the line of scrimmage like an Olympic sprinter, which is exactly what Watson does. And I really do agree with you that his ceiling is higher than Skye Moore, but when I'm picking at around 112 to 203, that's when I start to lean a little less from upside and a little more on what can I get right away that'll return on investment. So it's interesting that I have Pickens over Dotson and you have Watson over Moore, but I think these 4 guys are all guys that we've done quite a bit of research on. So I love what you were able to bring to the table with this.
I was going to say, it's funny how, like, I'm going more risk averse with Dotson and Pickens, and I'm shooting for the moon more with Watson and Skye Moore. And I think the fact that our rankings are inverse of each other just shows like different thought process with valuations, because we really haven't disagreed with anyone's valuations of a player. It's just almost a draft strategy type thing. So I guess moving on, do we want to get into some superlatives?
Yeah, absolutely. That'll round out the top 9. Do we want to discuss David Bell and Justin Ross, or we can
discuss? Well, I'm going to get to Justin Ross, so I'm actually pretty cool if we move on.
Okay, awesome. So go right ahead.
Well, no, I meant like late. Well, yeah. So actually, one of the superlatives we're talking about today is biggest wide receiver question mark, and I have 2 guys. One of them is Justin Ross. The other is John Metchi. Justin Ross is a huge question mark for me, because he was the number 1 receiver in this class. It was him and George Pickens freshman year. Justin Ross was unbelievable, early breakout age, alpha profile. And what I love about Justin Ross is that NFL teams still seem to really like him. Like a lot of franchises that continuously have good receivers, like Pittsburgh, Minnesota, they're interested in Justin Ross. And that speaks volumes to me, hearing those sorts of things. And they think that this guy can really rebound and be good. The concerns, however, were the neck injury and most recently the foot injury. And I kind of view Justin Ross as a better value than George Pickens. He has higher risk, but a similar reward. However, I think you can get Justin Ross around later in drafts. So if I can get a guy with a George Pickens ceiling, but I can take him at the 206 as opposed to the 108, that has my attention. The reason he's a question mark for me, though, is obviously the injuries, and I need to see the draft capital in the landing spot, because there's a whole lot of questions about Justin Ross. As for John Metchi, it's kind of weird. A prospect coming out of Alabama as like a top 100 player, but not really getting his fanfare is in a weird way almost a red flag. Like Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, they were all like can't miss guys. And John Metchi was good at Alabama statistically, and he didn't do anything wrong, but he's clearly not as good as anyone we've spoken about in this episode. And I just find it a little strange. Unfortunately, this is more of a gut feeling type of call than an analytical profile sort of thing. But I find it strange that no one seems to think he can be as good as any of these other Alabama receivers, and that concerns me.
The thing about John Metchi, and I'll make this super quick, so much of his yardage came after the catch, and I think that was a result of playing across a guy like Jameson Williams, who completely removes the top of the defense. And what that allowed John Metchi to do was have a lot of space over the middle of the field. But I don't know if he has that type of athleticism to bring that over to the next level. And his draft capital isn't reflecting that NFL teams necessarily think so either. That's my
exactly. So, but you kind of hear my point for Justin Ross, though. Like, there's a whole lot of questions, but that's even why I have George Pickens below Dotson, because for me mentally, I'm going to shoot for the moon with Justin Ross later in drafts. That's where my head's at right now.
Fair enough.
Who's your biggest question mark?
Ooh, it's David Bell for sure. You could argue David Bell has the most decorated production profile in this entire draft class with 8 receptions and 101 yards per game for his collegiate career. These are both the highest marks in this entire class. He came away with 1,000 yards as a 19-year-old freshman, and he came away with almost 1,300 yards this year. He does super well against man coverage, and a lot of that has to do with his polished ability as a route runner. The thing we've seen and the thing that scares me is we saw similar stuff when it came to guys like Tylan Wallace and it came to guys like Tyler Johnson. These are 2 guys that have clearly flamed out, but pre-NFL draft, people were pretty into these players because they were like, all right, if they get good DC and they end up in the right spot and they impress in training camp, they're going to see the field. They're going to beat NFL corners often enough to warrant fantasy production. Both of those guys never really had that opportunity because similarly to David Bell, they ranked really low as an athlete in their draft class. David Bell really did himself absolutely no favors at the NFL Combine. He's not an explosive player by any means. I think he could potentially climb post-NFL draft, depending on if he goes to the right situation, if there's a wide receiver needy team that takes him. But it's going to take a lot of dominoes falling in the right place for me to become more bullish on a guy like David Bell, regardless of his production profile. Just because I think when you're super polished at the collegiate level, it's really easy to jump up your numbers because your quarterback is just going to pepper you. And that's what happened with Bell. Bell got 86 receptions and over 100 targets as a 19-year-old. That's not really precedented by any means. But again, it really, and we were talking about this with Garrett Wilson and some of the other top 5 guys, the leaner receivers that do more athletically and also can run routes really well are going to immediately fall in the better favor of NFL head coaches. So unless David Bell is like surgical Keenan Allen, Devontae Adams level guy with his footwork, it's going to be a super uphill battle for him to become fantasy relevant.
I agree. That's why it wasn't one of my question marks, is that I think that we unfortunately have a lot of answers. Things can change. And if he gets like some better draft capital or situation, like you said, I'll certainly be more open-minded because I like David Bell a lot before. But the fact that like that combine was like almost Kyron Williams level bad. And additionally, Rondale Moore
statistically compared to the rest of the receiver class, after we watched what Olave, Wilson, and the rest of these guys ran and did. Obviously, Drake London didn't run, but I don't really care at all. But compared to what a lot of these receivers were able to do at the combine to boost their draft capital, David Bell just paled in comparison. And don't get me wrong, the NFL Combine, and we discussed this when we did our reactions, it's supposed to show you how players win. David Bell wasn't beating players at Purdue with his athleticism, but it doesn't help that he has none of it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So we have 2 more superlatives. We have our favorite sleeper and our favorite wide receiver landing spot. AJ, I'm really excited about my sleeper. Do you mind if I get up on the soapbox?
Yeah, go right ahead.
2 words, 1 name, 1 color. Danny Gray. Move over, Christian Watson.
Is gray a color? Timeout. Is gray a color? Or is
I'm
it like
wearing a gray sweatshirt right now.
But is it like, you know how black isn't technical? All right, whatever. This is not the color podcast.
What is this? Biology of colors? It's a fantasy football podcast. Jeez Louise.
All right, continue.
Danny Gray is my favorite sleeper in this class. And mind you also, please no one reach on Danny Gray. He is not as good as anyone we've talked about, but he's my wide receiver 12 after John Metchi. Have him over Jalen Tolbert, have him over Romeo Doubs, have him over Khalil Shakir, have him over Alec Pierce. I like this guy. I've done my research on this. I think this guy has a chance to be your round 3 Terry McLaurin or Deontay Johnson in this year's class. Gray is 24 years old out of SMU, but is going to the draft now. Gray was academically ineligible, which set back his timeline. 6 feet even, 185 pounds. Ran a 4.33 at the combine. This past year, he went for 49 receptions for 803 yards and 9 touchdowns in 10 games. He was a 3-star prospect coming out, which is like certainly meets the threshold for being an NFL player, provided you continue to produce. Not every single NFL player was a 5-star guy like Garrett Wilson. And he's been getting some draft buzz. What put me on to Danny Gray was I got a little Shefty notification saying, Minnesota Vikings looking at Danny Gray with their 2nd-round pick, brought him in for a top 30 visit. And full transparency, before that notification, I didn't see who I never heard of Danny Gray. I had to dig for this guy. He's not like on the forefront like of these analysis that people do. Like if you go to like Roto Underworld, like they talk about sleepers, but they're not like advertising Danny Gray. I'm a huge JJ Zacharisian fan. I listen to his stuff all the time and formulate my own opinions based on what I learned from him. And his model's like, oh yeah, Danny Gray, it's interesting. But no one's beating the drum for Danny Gray. But what got my attention is that the Minnesota Vikings are one of the best wide receiver evals in the entire NFL. Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne. It's underratedly very similar to the Pittsburgh Steelers in terms of drafting and developing wide receivers. So when the Minnesota Vikings want to bring in a guy with this production profile, that has my opinion. That has my attention. I'm very energetic right now, so bear with me if there's a couple mistakes in words. If you're on YouTube with us, my face is as red as Andy Dalton's hair. But I think that Gray, I'm really going to be watching the draft capital. If Danny Gray's a top 100 pick, I'm going to be really, really excited about this guy because there are reasons. There's a narrative. He was academically ineligible and had to go the JUCO route. So we understand why he is older. We understand why he didn't have this early breakout age. So that, combined with his talent, keeps me very, very open-minded as long as it's a later draft pick that I need to use. And that's my spiel. I'm excited about him.
I have not done my due diligence. I'm just going to let you speak your truth on Danny Gray and keep it moving to my sleeper, who's not becoming much of a sleeper with all this conversation I've heard about him, but Khalil Shakir out of the Boise State Broncos. He broke out as a sophomore where he had almost 900 yards and 6 touchdowns. During the short COVID season, he saw almost 38% of his team's targets. And then in 2021, he broke the 1,000-yard mark with 77 receptions and 7 touchdowns. The big thing that stood out for Khalil Shakir to me was he went over to the Senior Bowl, and scouts continually referred to him as one of the hardest players for the corners to stop. This guy is super twitchy. This guy can stop on a dime and change direction. And he was really giving some of the best NFL prospects at the defensive back position a serious hard time at the Senior Bowl. There was one, I tried to find the tweet, but it was one of the scouts that was there that said he had scored on 3 straight reps. And it wasn't like it was very close, or it wasn't like the quarterback made a play. Like, he had separation. And so this, similarly to what you just said, I think Khalil Shakir can be a Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin type. He's basically profiling as a slot receiver at the NFL level, but he's 6 foot, 195 pounds. To put it in perspective, that's what Rashad Bateman weighed in at his pro day last year. So this guy is not like some pipsqueak nobody by any means. The thing is, he's obviously not going to be asked to make contested catches. He pretty much struggled with that pretty extensively at Boise State. But again, when you're looking in the later rounds, the quickest route to exceeding your return on investment is this guy successful in the slot against good corners? And that is 2 of the biggest check marks on Khalil Shakir's production profile. I think if he goes in the 3rd or 4th round of the NFL draft, which I think is very realistic, I think you're going to have to keep an eye on him during the back end of even the 2nd or early 3rd round of upcoming rookie drafts. He's kind of like my version of Amon-Ra St. Brown this year, where I think he could come onto a team, and if enough opportunity opens up for him, it just takes one of those games where you give him 10 targets and all of a sudden he's a focal point of the offense.
I love everything you said. but roll Danny Gray in that 4.33 speed, baby. But I do like what you said. I do like Shakir as well. Like, he's like on my boards. He's good. Before we wrap up today, AJ, what is your favorite landing spot for a wide receiver in this year and why? There's a lot of good options. There's Kansas City. There's Buffalo. There's Arizona. There's
I'm gonna go with Tennessee.
I like it. Why?
I think Ryan Tannehill hasn't had a true possession receiver, and I think Tennessee's going to change that. And if they get the right guy, that guy is going to have quite a lot of space across from a healthy AJ Brown.
Are you concerned about Robert Woods?
No, not even a little bit.
Cool. For me, it's the New Orleans Saints, which is certainly surprising. Notice how neither one of us brought up the Chargers or the Chiefs. And here's why the Saints are my favorite landing spot. And I've thought about this a lot. Any guy who goes to New Orleans, I want a piece of. There's two outcomes. The first outcome is Michael Thomas plays. Michael Thomas will, like, I've been banging the drum for Marquez Callaway. I've been banging the drum for Adam Troutman. And, you know, there's something to be said for having faith and believing in prayer like I've been doing for these two guys. I'm certainly a man of faith. No one can question that. But at the end of the day, neither one of these guys are first round or even second round NFL picks, and for a reason. So any guy, if they drafted Christian Watson is better than Marquez Callaway is today. Christian Watkins is a better receiving threat than Adam Troutman is. As good as those guys are, and I like them and I support them, and I sincerely think they have a chance should New Orleans not bring in a receiver, what have you. So scenario one is Michael Thomas plays, and Michael Thomas is the alpha in the offense. However, whoever comes in is the clear-cut number 2 in a Jameis Winston-led offense. Jameis Winston is a good enough quarterback to support a top fantasy receiver. Just straight up. He's done it before. He supported Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So you're Jameis Winston's number 2 in a pass-first offense, because we don't know if Alvin Kamara, we don't know how many games he's going to miss for that domestic violence assault. We don't know the deal there yet. I really think there's a ton of opportunity to be torching number 2 corners or to be torching number 2 corners alongside Michael Thomas and getting a ton of volume. So that excites me. Alternatively, Michael Thomas doesn't play. And then whoever comes in is the clear-cut best receiver on the roster. If Garrett Wilson is the lead target in New Orleans, he could challenge for 140 targets as a rookie. Who else are they throwing to? Not Deontay Harris. They're not throwing a Lil Jordan Humphrey. They clearly don't want to throw it to Marquez Callaway. So I see a combination of a ton of volume available and a capable quarterback. And I really like how it shakes out any which way in New Orleans. And don't get me wrong, it's great if a rookie is tied to Justin Herbert or to Patrick Mahomes or or Josh Allen for that matter. But those teams are crowded. And I think that New Orleans honestly reminds me a lot of the Minnesota Vikings when they took Justin Jefferson. And we almost didn't realize how much opportunity was on the table for Justin Jefferson. We were kind of like, why do we want Kirk Cousins number 2 in this run-first offense? But then you realize that Garrett Wilson could be as good as a 29-year-old injured Michael Thomas. And then that 1 and 2 could really be a 1A and a 1B. And then things get really crazy and all hell breaks loose. So I'm really interested in whoever New Orleans drafts the receiver position, even if it's a round 2 guy like a Skye Moore.
You're not going to hear any complaints out of me. That was beautifully said. So well done.
Yeah.
So throwback to when this was going to be a 40-minute episode, and we are coming up on 1 hour. I want to say thank you guys for listening. Ben and I had a blast. We have been spending countless hours reviewing film, talking about these guys off camera, and really trying to refine our opinions so that you can dominate your rookie drafts. We're going to be putting out our big boards sometime before the NFL draft, and once we know landing spots, you're going to want to stay tuned. Next week, we'll be talking rookie running backs. Ben, do you have any parting words for the listeners?
I think I left it all out there today, man. I just hope all you guys have a great day.
Me too, man. Take it easy. As always, make sure to check out Verse Gaming, our fantastic sponsor who helps us put these YouTube videos together, at Verse Gaming on Instagram. Check them out at Verse Gaming on TikTok as well. My name is AJ.
I'm Ben Weiner. Take it easy.